The concatenate method is a lot like the clone method that you wrote in part 1, but has some additional challenge to it in that you are trying to tack on to the end of the original string another string. Okay, so let's take a quick look through how this works. So the concatenate method's signature is the name of the method's concatenate. It's going to return to us a new silly string. So we're not going to modify the original. We're going to return a new silly string and build up a new string inside of the concatenate method's implementation. And we give to concatenate another string that this is the string we're going to add on to the end of it. So if you can imagine, we have two silly strings set up in our tester. A's characters are hij and B's characters are 6 and 7. The way that we use this method is we would say, A, this silly string, I'm going to call your concatenate method, and I'm going to give you B to concatenate onto the end of yourself. And so what we assume the result of this is going to be is a new silly string, and what this silly string's name is going to be is undefined yet. So this is just going to return to us a new silly string, which from our tester, if we wanted to, we could assign to a variable, or we could just print it out. We could do whatever we want with it, but the point is concatenate is just going to give us back a silly string object, and its chars array is going to have how many characters in it. Well, this is one of the first problems that you're going to need to solve when implementing this method. How do you know how many characters needs to be in the new silly strings array? Well, our first silly string, we could ask it for its size. A is the silly string object that concatenate is called on. So we could say this dot size, and this dot size means A's size because A is the object that we called the method on. So we say, hey, how many characters do I have? This dot size. And we're going to add on to that, how many characters does B have? Well, B, when we're implementing this method, is actually going to be called other. That's the name of the parameter. And so we'll say other.size. So if we added these two up, we know that this characters array is going to need to have 5 elements in it, starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 will be our indices. So I'm going to make some space for those in memory. And so notice that similar to the clone method, you're going to need to set up some space in memory to hold a characters array. And then what we're going to do is we need to figure out how do we write a loop or 2 loops, or how do we programmatically copy all of the characters from the first array. So we're going to assign to the resulting silly string the characters h, I, j, which will correspond to the characters in the original silly string, and the characters 6, 7, which will correspond to the characters in the other array. Right? And so the result of calling this method should be a new object whose characters array is populated with all the first characters in the original strings array and the characters from the second strings array. So what we need to do here is figure out how much space do we allocate, and I gave some hint of that. One of the ways that we can ask A inside of the concatenate method, so I'm going to draw a line here and say this is inside of concatenate. So remember, inside of concatenate, we are working inside of the silly string class, and we're talking about what does any silly string do when you call the concatenate method on it. So when you call the concatenate method, if you want to call another method on the same object that this method was called on, so in this case we're saying A, I want to call a method on myself, you would say this dot size. All right, and so this dot size, if we used this method call within the concatenate method, when the computer goes to evaluate what is A.concatenate with B, this is going to refer to A, right? This refers to the object a method was called on. How do we get B's size? So B is going to be named other inside of this method, right? So it will the parameter other will be assigned B. And so other dot size is going to tell us how many characters B has. And then when we are going to assign specific elements to our new array that we just constructed, and so you'll have to construct a new array with the right size, what we're going to have to do is ask, hey, what is my character at a specific index? And so you could do that by saying this dot char at, and then the index. And we could say other.char to read the characters of the other silly string. Right? So we could say this.char, and we could use an index like 0 that will tell us the 0th character in A's elements, and other.char will tell us what is the index of 0 in B's elements, because other will be assigned B. All right. So one of the last things that you kind of need to know in order to do this is you can put integer expressions in array assignment operations. So what do I mean by that? So let's say that we are building up a character array named result. And remember, you're going to have to construct a new character array. And you're going to have to figure out how do we write an expression that tells us exactly the number of elements that we need this character array to hold. And so now the question is, how do we assign a value to a particular element in this array? So we can say something like result of 0 is assigned this dot char at 0. And so we're saying take the character of A, which is this dot, because that is the object we called this method on, and store it in the index 0 of our result array. Right? So that's something we're used to seeing at this point. One of the cool things about array index is we can substitute a variable here, right? So if you put this inside of a loop and you say result I is assigned this dot char at I, we know that Java will assign to each successive element some value. But you can also write integer expressions here, and this is going to be important because the tricky part of this particular method comes, how do you assign indice 0 of the B silly string or other to index 3 of the chars array? So you're going to have to come up with an integer expression that can take care of that for you. And the sort of hint that I'll give is, let's imagine that we had a variable set up like offset. And if we assigned offset to be, let's say, 2. And now what we're going to do is say result of offset plus, and here's where things get interesting, let's say plus 1. So offset plus 1 is assigned other dot char at 1. All right. So here we're saying take the character of the other array at index 1, which is 7, and assign it to our result array at offset, which is 2 plus 1. So this will be result 3 is assigned the other character, other strings character at index 1. And so this doesn't quite give you exactly what you'll need. You'll need to put these inside of a loop, but hopefully this gives you some intuition behind how you can programmatically populate the resulting array to set up a new silly string. And then remember, the last thing that you're going to need to do is construct a new silly string. And in the constructor, you are going to give it this result array, which will set up the characters array of the resulting silly string. And that will correspond to this object right here that you're returning from concatenate. You print that out in your tester, and you should be good to go.